words about everyone, so you get a sense what will happen in this course, all right? And I have how many? 27 minutes to do that. So this is Thomas Hobbes, born in 1588. Hobbes had a bit of a troubled childhood. A difficult father who was a clergyman got into a fight with another clergyman and had to disappear. He had a fight actually in a cemetery, which in the 16th century was no, especially for clergymen. Anyway, he grew up with uncles. Nevertheless, he got to the University of Oxford, did pretty good, and became a tutor of William Cavendish. And then traveled with him to Europe, France and Italy, and he met Galileo and was greatly influenced by Galileo. At that time, in English universities, they were mainly teaching Aristotle. Hobbes became very disenchanted with Aristotle, the dogmatism of Aristotle philosophy, and he was thrilled by the emergence of new positive science, what Galileo represented. Then he came back in England, and there were very turbulent politics. I will talk about this greater in the course. And he was among those, he's a conservative guy. If you are Republican, you will love it. He sided with the king against the parliament. And since he did that, 1640, he better skipped and went to France into exile, and then returned in 51 to England because he was a troublemaker. He was not only in conflict with the Republicans, he was also in conflict with the Royalists. He died in 1679. Now, his first work was a translation of Thucydides. He liked Thucydides because he thought Thucydides showed why democracy doesn't work, right? He's an absolutist, Hobbes, a conservative, right, absolutist. And then he wrote an interesting trilogy, and this is again shows the unity of sciences and social sciences. The first volume deals with the human body, with biology. The second works on the individual. It is really psychology. And the last one works on society and politics. And he thinks the way how to understand human existence is start with bodily functions and move from bodily functions to politics and philosophy. And then his major work is Leviathan. This is the work probably most of you heard the title of. And this was actually at a time when Charles I was already executed. He actually was considering there should be a possibility to transfer loyalty to a new ruler. But the fellow royalists, or in exile in Paris, didn't like. So now he had to escape Paris to escape the anger of the royalists. This is the first edition of the Leviathan, one of the most influential books in politics ever written. Well, not a very attractive book. The main theme is that in the state of nature, naturally by human nature, people are quite evil. And therefore order has to be imposed over people above each other. Otherwise there would be a war, we would be in a state of war of everyone against everyone. This is the major citation from Leviathan. That's what everybody knows, right? Okay, John Locke is the next, born half a century later, also a British scientist. He came from a minor gentry family. He also studied in Oxford philosophy, and, as I said, medicine was also his second major. Early on, he was very much attracted to hops, but then he met a major British politician, Shaftesbury. He performed a liver operation on him, assumedly saving his life. And then he changed course from a conservative and became a sort of a Republican, or by American political standards. He shifted from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party. That's what he did, right? Well, in fact, he was even involved in '82 in a plot to overthrow absolutism, and he had to escape to the Netherlands, returned in '89 to London, and died a few years later. His conservative work was in '64, his address at the college, in which actually offered the Hobbesian thesis: kings are gods and the people are beasts. But then he changed completely. He already writes an important paper on toleration. Liberals are still reading it. And especially he writes the two treatises, which is a major foundation work for modern democratic theory, major foundation work for the American Constitution as well. This is the first edition of it. So what are the main points? He said, well, men are born free and equal, and in the state of nature they are good. There is a need for superior, but the superior can also be accepted by the consent of everybody who is subjected to authority. And he is the first political theorist who advocates the separation of powers and has a major impact, together with Jean-Jacques Rousseau, on the foundation of the American Constitution. This is where the American Constitution comes from. Now we move from England to France, to Montesquieu, who was born at the late 17th century and lived in the kind of already swinging 18th century. 18th century was a century, at least in France, fun to live in. Well, it was a lot of turbulence, but interpersonal relationships were quite interesting, I would say. Reminds me of the 1960s, you know, hobbies and, you know, hippies and whatever, right? Sort of before the French Revolution, you have the 1960s kind of stuff. Well, there was not marijuana, but there was a lot of various kind of sex, right? Which made the 18th century quite fun. And the life of Montesquieu made it quite fun. Well, he was born in the right place, near Bordeaux, where the good wine is grown, bred. His name was actually Charles Louis II, and he became Montesquieu when his uncle died and inherited the title of Baron de Montesquieu from him. He studied law. He's a major legal theorist. Any one of you who is heading to law school will have to take this course, because the theory of law, right, starts with Montesquieu, right? Anyway, he studied at the University of Bordeaux. And 28, he did the right thing, you know, to be a parliamentarian in Bordeaux was boring. And rather he went into commerce. He became a wine merchant and a mercenary and an adventurer. Spent 2 years traveling all over in Europe and having lots of fun, leaving his wife behind to run the business. Not very nice of him. So the wife was sending the money, right, to money orders or the equivalents of it, wherever he was having fun, you know, in Italy or England or the Netherlands, where there was fun. Then when he returned, he began to do writing, particularly his major book we will talk about, and he died in 55. About the work, there are two major works: the Persian Letters, which is a fun work, an ironic view of French and Persian of the life of Paris in the eyes of two Persian visitors, a kind of ironic view of the absurdities of French life. And then, 48, he writes finally his major book, The Spirits of Laws, which, you know, it's an extremely important book, and you will read, this is the first edition of it, you will read from it. What are the major contributions? Well, as I mentioned already, Locke noticed the need for the separation of powers. But Locke separated only three branches of government: the executive, the legislative, and once what he called the federative. Montesquieu formulates it the way how it is in the American Constitution, right? Namely, he separates the legislative, the executive, and the judicial branch. And we will talk a great deal about this, why it is so important to separate the juridical branch from the legislative and the executive. And then he also did something very pioneering, extremely naive way, but very pioneering. He looked at ecosystem, right? He's sort of the first environmentalist, not quite. Ibn Khaldun did much before him. But for modern, more contemporary theorists, it's really Montesquieu who tries to explain the nature of laws with climatic conditions, looks at the interaction between nature and society, and it took us basically 300 years to realize how important this interaction is, right? So he's really doing some absolutely path-breaking work. Now this is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. I mean that I have many favorites among these people. Jean-Jacques Rousseau is one of them. Not because I disagree with everything what he said, but he says it so provocatively and it is in such a fun way that I just cannot resist to enjoy it all the time. He was born already in the 18th century and died just before the French Revolution, though played a big role paving the road to the French Revolution. About his life, he was born in Geneva, so he's Swiss, whatever it means. His father was a watchmaker, and like Hobbes, had a turbulent childhood. The father probably had some debt, so he had to jump the boat and went to Istanbul and left his son behind, who then in 28 moved to Annecy, France, and met a wonderful lady, Mrs. Warrens, who took in young boys, right? He was just about 16 at that time. She was about 10 or 12 years his senior. And, well, I will talk about this more. I will give you all this gossip in this course. Well, it fascinated a lot of people. Later on, this interesting relationship between Jean-Jacques and Mrs. Warrens. Stendhal. Anybody remembers the name of the French novelist? Rouge et Noir.